Welcome to today's panel on understanding thermal energy networks, a building decarbonization approach to high-quality union jobs. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to have so many of you here, and we're also so grateful for our fantastic panel of experts that are lined up today, who I will introduce in a bit. First, my name is Pria Mahadevan, and I'm a Research and Policy Development Associate with the Climate Jobs Institute at Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations. I'll be the moderator for today's panel, but first I want to introduce you to the Climate Jobs Institute, as well as set the context for today's discussion. So next slide, the Climate Jobs Institute, or CJI, was formally established within Cornell's ILR school in 2023, but it was built upon a large body of work conducted over the course of more than a decade by our executive director, Dr. Lara Skinner, as well as many others. Our mission is to guide New York State's and the nation's transition to a strong and equitable clean energy economy that not only tackles climate change, but also creates high-quality union jobs, confronts racial and gender inequality, and builds a diverse and equitable clean energy workforce. So as part of that, today we are discussing thermal energy networks, or TENS, and the role that these systems can play in achieving all of those core elements of our mission. So just to set us up a little bit, CJI has been interested in researching thermal energy networks because of both their ability to achieve significant reductions in climate warming greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the potential to transition and grow union construction jobs and careers at scale. We know that we must address the building sector in order to address climate change. When accounting for the electricity that buildings pull from the grid, buildings are responsible for the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's true not just here in New York, where they comprise 43% of all of our emissions, so that's almost 50%, but also nationally, where buildings make up 31% of all emissions, so close to a third. And the situation is especially dire where I am here in New York City, where our buildings are responsible for 2/3 of the emissions in the entire city. And rather than bending the curve and reducing emissions, these numbers have only grown since 1990. So put simply, it's clear to us here at CJI that effectively tackling climate change means effectively tackling building decarbonization. However, so far we are not decarbonizing our buildings on pace with our decarbonization targets, which calls for a 65% emissions reduction by 2035 and 90% by 2050. In fact, if building decarbonization were to continue at its current rate, it could take 200 years or more to fully address building emissions. That's partly because so far we have taken a building by building approach to building decarbonization, and that approach is not only expensive, but often locks out union contractors from accessing that critical work. So from both a climate and labor perspective, we know that a new approach is sorely needed. So enter thermal energy networks. So thermal energy networks, by contrast, can not only scale building decarbonization across multiple buildings at once, but also require the existing skills of our building trades union workforce and can harness the network that utilities have already built. So that's just a little bit of setup. In today's webinar and panel discussion, we're going to dig into both the opportunities that TENS can unlock for our union workforce, as well as possible pathways to scale these systems. So if you head over to our agenda slide, I'm not sure if the slides are showing up yet, but just to talk us through our agenda for today, first, my colleague Reyna Cohen will walk us through a brief presentation on thermal energy networks, including an overview of this technology, why TENS are necessary, and pathways to making TENS a reality. Then we will hear a brief presentation from Aaron Miller, who is the Eastern Regional Manager at Shark Energy, about one particular type of thermal energy network that harnesses the power of wastewater for energy. And then finally, we'll jump into our panel discussion on thermal energy networks, followed by an audience Q&A session. So as your questions are coming up throughout this webinar, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A on the Zoom, or just jot them down and save them for the end. We will try to get to as many as possible. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to my colleague, Reyna Cohen. Reyna is also a Research and Policy Development Associate at CJI and was previously the Just Transition Policy Manager for both Align and New York Renews, where she organized labor unions in support of climate justice policy in New York. Here at CJI, Reyna was the lead author on our report for a climate jobs program for Pennsylvania, and she is also lead author on our forthcoming primer on understanding thermal energy networks as a means to scale high-quality union jobs, which will be released later this week. So Reyna, before I hand it off to you, I wanted to ask, is there anything that you want to highlight about TENS and your work on TENS so far through your primer?
That's such a oh, that's such a great question. But I think really as we go through the slides and the presentation, I'll have ample opportunity to talk about everything that I've learned. And it looks like our slides are back up. Um, so let's kick it off. And thank you so much, Priya, for that really important context and for introducing me. All right, next slide. So thermal energy networks, the technology that we're here to talk about today, are technologies that heat and cool buildings at the campus, block, or neighborhood scale with non-combusting, non-emitting, zero carbon thermal sources such as geothermal or waste heat using a network of underground interconnected pipes. TENS or thermal energy networks, or TENS as you may hear them called, heat and cool buildings at the campus, block, or neighborhood scale. These thermal sources that are used to heat and cool these buildings through what is called a heat exchanging fluid, usually water, which flows through this system of underground pipes and end up in your building, determining the temperature you feel inside. Because heating and cooling drive a large majority of what we call end use emissions, or the greenhouse gases that are produced directly in buildings themselves, thermal energy networks, or TENS, are a solution for reducing emissions from buildings at scale across a group or network of buildings rather than one building at a time. Thermal energy networks can use a variety of thermal resources, as we say on the slide, including geothermal. And these kind of geothermal TENS are also called GENS. But thermal energy networks may also use waste heat or wastewater, as we'll hear about later. This also makes TENS a really key part of a circular economy by reusing energy in the form of that waste heat, say an office building's data center, to heat another, helping to balance what we call the thermal load of the network. Next slide. Now, this is where things start to get a little tricky. There are a lot of technologies that can fall under the definition of TENS, including traditional district energy or district heating systems, which some of you may know about, as well as newer technologies, including network geothermal. Looking specifically at district energy systems, there are, as of today, 5 generations of district energy technologies. And we do have examples of all 5 across the US, although many of them are not considered TENS because they are emitting and based on fossil fuels. On this slide, you can see a diagram of a 3rd generation district energy system. Here you can see that this generation uses one singular centralized heat plant, which you can see on kind of the middle left of the slide, to heat and cool pressurized water to over 100 degrees Celsius, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And this superheated water carries that thermal energy, that heat, throughout the system of underground pipes and eventually to your building. Another key distinction of this generation is that the system is unidirectional, which means hot water flows from that central heat plant away into your building, and then the remaining cool water flows back to the plant to be heated once more. Next slide. From 3rd generation to 4th generation, we can kind of see the innovations that are leading to great efficiencies and circularity in this technology. Looking first at how 4th generation district energy TENS are heated, we can see that multitude of heat plants and heat sources are used. On this slide, you can see data center waste heat, a geothermal plant, solar thermal, and this allows for a wider variety of zero carbon, zero emission sources to flow through the system. Another kind of key feature of newer generations is that the water, that pressurized water that flows through the pipes, is heated to a much lower temperature, about 30 to 70 degrees Celsius or 86 to 158 degrees Fahrenheit. This means an overall more efficient system because you're losing less heat as the water flows through. Another key innovation of a fourth generation district energy 10 is we begin to see the bidirectional flow of water in the system. This means that not only can buildings take up heated water to control the temperature that you feel inside, but they can also themselves act as a heat source, again, which you can kind of see visualized on this slide. This means that the excess heat from a building can actually be put to use and isn't just kind of evaporated into our atmosphere. Again, increasing the efficiency and circularity of the system. This type of 10 is one that we often see on college campuses. For instance, a pretty famous example in the 10s world is Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, where fourth generation district energy 10 heats 47 buildings over 731 acres. Another kind of 10s world famous one is Miami University, confusingly in Oxford, Ohio, where it heats 10 buildings over 25 acres. Again, we see this at many colleges, Carleton College, Smith College, and dozens of others that I will not bore you with right now. Next slide. Now, network geothermal is kind of the latest innovation that we see in 10s technology. And according to BDC, or Building Decarbonization Coalition, these systems are made up of a closed loop of pipes filled with water or other liquid solutions that heat exchange in fluid, underground shafts, and as you can see with these little red and blue arrows going 2 directions from each building, heat pumps connected to each building. And that really is the innovation here. These systems, because of this very specific design, are incredibly efficient. They, unlike kind of the district energy technologies that we just spoke about, these systems use ambient temperature water throughout with heat pumps for each individual building that can then control the thermal regulation of that singular building, allowing for that water to be heated or cooled with relative ease depending on the building's needs. And something that is really kind of amazing about a network geothermal system is that the more buildings that are integrated into the system that are connected to this network of pipes, the more efficient that network becomes. This is because, again, thinking back to those concepts of circularity and heat generation from a building returning into the system, each building that gets connected to a network geothermal system has different thermal energy demands and may even produce excess heat. And because of this heat pump connection, that heat can get put back into the system. This leads to waste heat reuse and what we call load canceling. In other words, using one building's heat generation to completely cancel out the heating load or the heating demand of another building, overall creating less energy demand and more efficiency. Again, for example, thinking of a data center's waste heat that can be reused to meet a residential building's heating needs when interconnected through this network geothermal system. And again, this is a newer technology, but we do have examples of it across the US. Particularly, I want to highlight the Whisper Valley neighborhood development in Manor, Texas, which connects 237 homes and has plans to even expand like much beyond that. And And again, we do see this on college campuses, such as at Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction, Colorado. Next slide. So as we heard from Pria, we know that we cannot solve the climate crisis without rapidly reducing emissions from buildings. And we know that our current model of building decarbonization just isn't working to create that rapid reduction, in part because of the sheer scale of the problem and its cost. And this is really why TENs are so necessary and where we see them come into play. First and foremost, TENs are designed to decarbonize buildings at scale. They are inherently a scale technology by connecting a group of buildings and reducing emissions from them all at once. Specific models or ways of deploying TENs can also help get at this issue of scale. For instance, this kind of newer model, utility thermal energy networks, or UTENs, which some of you may know about, are a newer method of deploying TENs through our existing utility structures, our existing gas utilities, electric utilities, water utilities, even municipal utilities. There are many, many reasons why this is a really exciting innovation, but thinking specifically on scale, using existing utility structures such as their access to the right of way and their existing in-house skilled union workforce are really key to driving that scale. And then turning more toward the public sector can also play a really important part in the scalability of TENs by using public institutions such as schools, universities, even Capitol plazas or other government buildings to be used as what we call anchor tenants, where a system can be housed and then spread out through the rest of the neighborhood. And we're already seeing this in states such as Massachusetts and even right here at home in New York. Looking beyond scalability, TENs are also extremely resource efficient. In fact, network geothermal, the kind of last technology that we spoke about, is up to 6 times as energy efficient as gas furnaces, which we know many buildings use today to heat themselves. While much research is still needed on just how efficient TENs are, zooming into ground source heat pumps, which are a feature of many TENs, again, thinking back to that diagram of network geothermal, we can kind of get a hint at just how transformational this solution will be. Ground source heat pumps themselves can generate up to 65% in energy savings. And most importantly, we see this technology remaining both efficient and effective in cold temperatures. TENs can, beyond energy efficiency, TENs can also save on water by taking the place of water-intensive cooling towers and chillers that often cool large buildings like schools, hospitals, and offices. This will be critical as our resources change through the climate crisis. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, implementing TENs will help deliver serious cost savings all the way from the system and utility level down to individual families. Right now, our building decarbonization model means a huge jump in our energy demand, meaning more renewable energy development and repair, replacement, and build out of a really antiquated, old transmission system, all of which is very costly. Due to how our energy system works, more often than not, those expenses will get passed on down to ratepayers or the individual customers who pay utility bills. Because TENs are so energy efficient, they can help avoid some of these necessary costly investments. Again, more research is really needed to understand the kind of scaled aspect of TENs, but we do have research that shows that mass deployment of ground source heat pumps alone could help avoid roughly 557 billion in new transmission costs alone. $557 billion. For utilities, a strategic and prioritized approach to deploying TENs where there is already a need to repair or replace existing gas infrastructure means less investment in like-for-like replacements, i.e. replacing gas infrastructure with gas infrastructure, that risk becoming costly stranded assets as we transition into a green economy. This also means that the cost of this also means that the cost of decarbonization can be spread across a large number of buildings, because the utility is investing in a future proofing of its business model while also making our heating system more sustainable. By spreading those costs, this means that we can decarbonize buildings that were once seen as really difficult to decarbonize without the right incentive structures, particularly thinking of like low-income households, giving these households access to clean, green, affordable heating and cooling. And most importantly, TENS help deliver cost savings for families already struggling to pay expensive energy bills. Again, zooming into ground source heat pumps alone, these can help households avoid or save nearly 50% on energy costs. And looking at places where TENS, the broader technology, have already been deployed, we can see just how affordable it is. Going back to that Whisper Valley development in Texas, residents pay one flat monthly fee of $60 for both heating and cooling all year round. And residents in Framingham, Massachusetts, the location of the nation's first U10 or utility thermal energy network, will pay as little as $8 a month and up to $10 a month for heating and cooling, a sliding scale that is dependent. Next slide. Now, I know this is the thing that most of us are extremely excited about to talk about today, so I won't get into too much detail, but one of the most powerful aspects of TENS is how transformative they are when we consider building an equitable, green, union economy. In fact, one of the reasons why we did this report at CGI is because of just how crucial we believe TENS will be in creating green union career pathways in a carbon-free future. Part of this power is in, again, that scaled nature of TENS, scaling the work of building decarbonization from single building to single building without any kind of rhyme or reason, dependent on voluntary action from individual building owners, just doesn't create the same scale of work as addressing whole neighborhoods of buildings at once. And that inherent scaling of the project means scaling the jobs creation potential. And this, beyond that, the scaled nature of the work will help address fears that Pria touched on of locking union contractors out of the residential sector in a green transformation. More work in bigger projects means more union contractors might be able and interested in taking on the work, creating the potential for an ecosystem of high roads, highly paid union jobs with benefits in the residential sector to take the place of existing low roads jobs. The other part of this power is in the technology itself. The skills and even the components that are used in TENS mirror many of those used in the existing gas system. This means a place for the skilled union members of the fossil fuel workforce in the green economy, where in some cases, maybe they didn't envision themselves there. I'm thinking specifically of all the union drillers, pipe layers, loopers, electricians, HVAC maticians, I think they're maticians, but I meant to say technicians, materials movers, and many more can find a new home through TENS. Next slide. And as this map shows, there are already many TENS that exist across the country in that kind of solid blue color. By our count, over half the country is already using TENS. And this map also shows the steps that we need to take to make TENS an even bigger part of our reality. Help making a TENS-dense future. The diagonal lines represent states where utilities have proposed U10s, again, utility thermal energy networks, and that's Colorado, Minnesota, New York, and Massachusetts. And it also shows where we are making that innovation a reality in Massachusetts, which has the first operational U10 in the country, the kind of one little green state all the way in the right. Next slide. And I think the most exciting thing is that there are still so many things we can do, so many ways that we continue to push to make TENS a reality. First, really considering our power in policy. In just 4 years, that is looking back to 2020, 14 states have introduced legislation to jumpstart the adoption of TENS. And of those 14, 11 have passed legislation. I think a lot of that energy, a lot of that excitement, a lot of that legislative power is due to these coalitions of labor and community and climate that we are seeing pushing for this legislation, pushing for the deployment of this technology. And we need to continue to build those cross-movement coalitions, continue to build particularly labor leadership to see, to drive the reality of a union green future in building decarbonization. And lastly, we need to continue supporting these innovative models that we touched on, like the adoption of TENS into the utility model, like the deployment of TENS through the public sector, to really harness this energy and reimagine our existing structures in a new way. And that's just a little bit about the wonderful technology of thermal energy networks. We did condense, an extensive primer into just these slides, and I'm so excited for you all to read the primer and discover all the things that our team discovered through this research. And with that, I will pass it back to Priya.
Thank you so much, Reyna, for setting us up on what TENS are and also why they're so important and exciting. Really excited to dig into this more with our panel in just a moment. But first, I would like to introduce Aaron Miller. Aaron is the Eastern Regional Manager at Shark Energy. He is a seasoned professional with extensive experience working on both sides of the energy meter and has spent the last decade focused on deploying deep energy efficiency retrofits in multifamily, residential, commercial, and industrial buildings across the US and Canada. At Shark, Aaron supports the development of thermal energy networks that utilize wastewater to create circular energy systems for buildings across North America. And he was kind enough to make some time to provide a deeper dive on this particular type of system. So Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand it off to you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Clearly, that picture was taken when I used to shave, so I need to get an updated picture. So, I'm going to keep this really brief, and I'm just going to throw it out to anybody on this that if they'd like to do a deeper dive into the technology that we have, please just reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to go in through it. I want to start with this slide just to show you the many sectors that we can satisfy or we can serve using wastewater as an energy source. The main throughput of all these sectors in the center is that they make a lot of hot water waste, hydronic waste of some form or fashion, and they have large loads heating, cooling domestic hot water. And it just all comes down to scale, whether you need the piranha box or the shark. But the key is you can see a diverse mix of building types and market types. And that's really the key in the long run to unlocking the true value proposition of utility, of thermal energy networks in general. When you have multiple building types and building classes working together on the same loop, you really can get a lot of energy out of it. And I'm going to focus primarily on 2 district systems that we have operational right now in North America. The first one's in the outskirts of Denver. This is an old rodeo stockyard that has been repurposed into a mixed-use campus. Roughly about 1 million square feet of building is currently operational on this campus. We're using sanitary from downtown Denver, passes by a giant, in 2 giant pipes that go underground, past this rodeo stockyard. We side stream a portion of that into an underground cistern, which acts as our battery, our thermal energy battery for the system. And we run that through 2 sharks. And you can see on the top right-hand corner is a picture of the Shark 880s in this very, very large barn that's designed for future capacity, getting to the point of scalability and the phased approach. We started out with 2 Shark 880s, you can see, providing almost 4 megawatts of thermal energy only from wastewater. The rule of thumb is 1 million gallons a day of wastewater equals 1 megawatt of thermal energy. It's incredible what you can do with just the sanitary that's gravity flowing past the property. So again, one of the keys here is because we have a mixed use campus, you've got some buildings that are doing 100% refrigeration, rejecting all that energy into the loop. You've got some housing that's doing heating and cooling simultaneously. There's an aquatic and equestrian center that's doing a lot of mostly heating. So in shoulder seasons, when you don't have really extreme temperatures, just the buildings themselves pushing and pulling energy out of the loop, they support the loop almost completely. And the Shark is running there just to provide temper, to keep that loop in the ideal temperature zone throughout the year so that all of the heat pumps that are connected in each of these buildings can operate as efficiently as possible. So the great thing is, again, as you can see, this barn has a lot of space in it. So as they bring on more buildings, we'll just add more capacity. And what's incredible as a sidebar, because there's so much space in this building, the ESCO that operates the system, the utility, the city, they will have galas. They'll host events where they're serving drinks and food, and people are sitting there eating and drinking while there's roughly 3,000 gallons a minute of raw sewage running through the system behind them, and they have no idea because the system is completely sealed, odor-free, no cross-contamination. So it's safe, it's reliable, scalable, and completely circular in that the very waste that's being made by the buildings is going to be used to feed the system. So it's one of the few systems, wastewater energy transfer, where the energy for the system itself is directly driven by the loads it's serving. So scalable, repeatable, and holistic, circular, however you want to put it. And then the other system that I wanted to highlight today was from Lelum, which is outside of Vancouver. I know there was a large contingency of people from New York that just came out to visit it, and I really hope that I can bring more people out to Denver and to Vancouver. And quite frankly, we just launched our first shark and piranha plants in Brooklyn at the Lafayette revitalization of Brooklyn. So there's networked geo plus wastewater energy transfer in action right now in Brooklyn, that once we get the systems fully commissioned, happy to bring people by and show them. But again, what I wanted to show here is this is our baby shark. This is our smallest unit, and it's supporting in full now 1.3 million square feet of indoor space. And as they bring on more buildings, we're going to increase the capacity of the system simply by adding additional hardware in this barn. And what's really neat is because it's new construction and because we have a vision for the future, these clean water storage tanks, this is the clean water side, these are 3 times bigger than they need right now. But again, because we have that vision for the future, we're able to right size the support system of the 10 for the future capacity. So when you have a vision, you can build it in as you need it. So again, mixed use buildings, pushing and pulling energy in and out of the system, in and of itself supports the 10. The wastewater is there to act as a temper, if you will. And the great thing is, when you tie geo in, we did an analysis for that Brooklyn property to pick up the entire thermal load of a very large low income housing complex. We were originally going to need 125 boreholes. By using wastewater and only the wastewater coming out of the apartments, the showers, the toilets, what have you, we were able to right size that bore field down to about 93 holes. And in New York, that's about $500,000 to $600,000 upfront CapEx savings. And then over the life cycle of the system, we're going to be using the sanitary, like I said, to temper that loop so you don't have that creep out of range on geo. So you can keep that loop in that ideal range for the next 25 years or plus, so you don't have to dig more holes and you don't need to recommission the system. So I really just wanted to touch on this real quick and just again stress that wastewater is the most efficient way to heat, cool, and make domestic hot water for buildings. And when you pair it up with other assets like air source heat pumps and geo, you start getting a multiplier effect. So it takes a village, and we're happy to be part of that village. So I'll pass it back over. I really wanted to keep this short and sweet. And again, I welcome anybody to reach out to me directly. Happy to do a deeper dive into how our 2 technologies work. But really, thanks for having me here. This is super exciting.
And thank you so much for being here, Erin, and for sharing that presentation on what wastewater powered tents look like on specific projects. It's really cool. And like you said, it's a whole village of technology within this big umbrella of tents that we're talking about. So Erin is going to rejoin us for the Q&A session, but now I'd like to introduce our panel. I've already introduced Reyna. Reyna's going to stick around and share more about her research insights. So Reyna, welcome back. In addition, we are very lucky to have 4 other guests joining us today. So first, John Murphy is an international representative of the United Association of Journeymen and Apprentices of the Plumbers and Pipe Fitting Industry, or UA, which involves representing 13 local unions in New York with more than 2,400 members. John joined the union in 1984 as an apprentice and is also a 4th-generation union plumber in New York City. Previously, John held the positions of business agent, financial secretary, treasurer, and is the former business manager for the Plumbers Union Local 1. And John has been an advocate of TENS for years. So John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Priya. Just one slight correction. We have over 24,000 members in New York State.
That is my bad. You are totally right. I read that incorrectly. 24,000 members in New York. Thank you for that correction. Lisa Dix leads the New York team at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, or BDC. There, she designs and drives comprehensive stakeholder-led campaigns and policy efforts to decarbonize New York at a neighborhood scale. Her work has led to significant policy breakthroughs across the nation, including many on TENS. So Lisa, it's great to have you with us today. Greg Camullos is a department manager at Con Edison. He leads the Utility Thermal Energy Networks team, which has currently proposed 3 large thermal energy network projects in New York City and Westchester County. He has been with Con Edison for over 19 years, working across all sectors of the company, including electric, gas, steam, and construction. So Greg, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Sonal Jessel. Sonal is an environmental and energy justice advocate and public health expert. Previously, she served as the director of policy at We Act for Environmental Justice, leading the New York policy team, where she spearheaded several successful campaigns, including campaigns on thermal energy networks in New York. Today, Sonal is the senior program director for the Building Power Resource Center, which is a national resource hub for community organizations and local government staff to harness federal funds for the development of new projects in the buildings and power sectors. So Sonal, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Pria. And I'll just say, was part of the Upgrade New York that was really spearheaded by Lisa and John.
Absolutely. And we're so excited to get into all of that with you guys. So I have a lot of questions. We have a little under an hour, plus we want to have some time for audience questions. So I'm just going to jump in. But again, reminder for folks on the webinar in the audience to jump in the Q&A. We've got folks sort of taking tabs on what's going on in the Q&A, and we're going to work really hard to uplift as many of those as we can. But if we can't get to your question, please feel free. Like Reyna mentioned, we have a primer on TENS coming out later this week, and hopefully that can help clarify more details of whatever we can't get to today. So John, I want to kick this conversation off with you. So Reyna just provided an overview of what thermal energy networks are, and Erin helped us zoom in on one particular type of system, but you've become a very strong advocate for this technology and its potential for the labor movement. So I'm curious, take me back to the first time you learned about TENS. What was your initial reaction to learning about this kind of energy system, and what was it that got you so excited?
Well, if we go back to 2019 with the enactment of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA, it immediately put thousands of workers in the fossil fuel industry at risk of losing their livelihoods, which began our quest to find a true transition. It had been spoken about a transition where pipe fitters can become offshore wind technicians, highly, highly unlikely. But there are other transitional mediums out there, like a thermal energy network, that would use the same skills, the same training, and basically the same personnel. Those that installed fossil fuel systems would now install thermal energy networks. The utility workers that maintain the gas grid in so many communities can now maintain a thermal energy network. So what I'm so pleased about, it's one of the few transitional forms of energy that everybody can agree on. No matter where you come from, what size, whether it's business, whether it's climate activists, businesses across the country everybody seems to be very enthusiastic about it.
Great, thank you. And we will get into sort of a little bit of a deeper dive on what those jobs are that you're talking about. But before we do, I want to go over to Lisa. So Lisa, at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, or BDC, you all have been educating and advocating on TENS across the country for quite some time. So broadly, I would love to understand what makes this model so appealing from both a decarbonization and an equity perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's great to be here with everybody today. Thanks for having me. So, really, buildings, as you identified, are one of the biggest emission sources, not only in the state in which I work in, New York, but across the nation. And it's good. It's a real sector that is going to be incredibly challenging to decarbonize. And right now, across the nation, and New York is part of this because they're a leader in a lot of emissions and decarbonization policies. The way in which, really to kind of get the inroads into building decarbonization is it's really, policies that promoted, individual consumers, homeowners to get incentives to then, install these incentives in their home. And when we look at the landscape just in New York, we're talking about 6 million homes, and we're talking about 180,000 commercial and institutional buildings that need to be decarbonized to move our emissions trajectory to a net zero by 2050, which is the climate law that John spoke about. And when we think about just going by house by house by house by house, project by project, or just individual consumers on a voluntary basis deciding whether or not they're going to do this for themselves, it puts a lot of risk and uncertainty in terms of how we're going to get to the scale of emissions and the time frame that we need to get that done. And it really is, from an equity perspective, very difficult because, it's putting a lot of onus on individual people, a lot of people who have challenges, affording their groceries and, their monthly expenses to do all of this work themselves to get, their homes decarbonized. And so this house by house, when we looked at the scale, we just really needed to have a different kind of paradigm, where we were not looking at just individual buildings or individual houses, but we were really changing the paradigm and the policy structures in this state and across the nation to think about how we're going to decarbonize at a neighborhood and a community scale. And so that's why we are really invested in this, because not only are we not going to be able to make our targets just in the state of New York for climate in time, but we're not going to also be able to really contribute to a decrease in this sector nationally. The last point that I will make is that, we also realize that, there's a lot of conversations, not only in the state of New York, but also across the nation, that, we need to get this ready, trained workforce for building decarbonization. And we already have an incredible already trained workforce. And really where the disconnect is when you do things house by house, or we're really just targeting at the residential sector, and we're not looking at the gas system as a whole, which is in terms of the entire gas system and how do we back down those emissions and put in a scalable transition, then we're really talking about all of those workers that are highly skilled, that we actually need a highly trained and skilled workforce to build these systems. They're going to be able to really just transfer from the workforce that they are working in now directly to this green workforce. And it provides that high road job and union job transition with an already ready and trained workforce. So that's the reason why we're so engaged.
That's great. Thank you so much. You covered a lot there. And I'm wondering, Sonal, if you can jump in and go a little bit deeper on the equity piece, because I know you've also been involved in TENS and building decarbonization, both at We Act and in your current job from this very specific equity and environmental justice perspective. In what ways do you see this kind of energy system as addressing those things and as separate from the building by building model that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, thanks, Priya. So there's a lot of things here, and I'll just kind of try to focus on what's helpful in addition to what John and Lisa already covered. From the environmental justice perspective, something that communities and arguably everyone is very focused on is how to breathe clean air and how to reduce pollution. And so certainly a benefit of TENS and the climate goals that New York has and other states have is the potential to really lower pollution in communities and everywhere, arguably, because TENS can be done from that industrial side as well as like community and residential side. And so the promise to clean up people's air is really massive. And so when you do it through TENS, you are doing, theoretically, if we're thinking about residential, whole zones and neighborhoods that are able to take a lot of the more polluting energy sources and technologies offline, both in the community, but also in people's homes, and really pair TENS with some building electrification work that will help both with indoor and outdoor air pollution. So that's a major plus on that sort of individual benefit side. The other really big benefit is also that it is hard to do the individual level building decarbonization. And particularly that is a really big barrier when it comes to engaging with lower income communities that are already sort of struggling to pay all sorts of other bills. They are dealing with a lot of other hardships that make it hard to focus on how do you address the energy transition for your home and your community. TENS is a really great way, again, to kind of take this more wholesale model and transform entire neighborhoods and industries, which is really exciting. And then from the perspective of where I currently work at Building Power Resource Center, we're a national resource center. We work with local governments, community and labor organizations to build clean energy projects, focus on building decarb. And we're not just technical assistance, but we advise on the campaigns that have to happen between community, labor coalitions, and partners in government to really push city and states to develop projects that give tangible benefits to working class communities on the bills, lowering bills, reducing pollution, and creating good union jobs. And TENS is a really great place, like John and Lisa have said, to kind of do that organizing work, bringing communities into the climate and energy transition space, bringing labor, like we said, into that space, and really finding a common ground to move projects forward that really help benefit people in entire neighborhoods and entire zones.
That's great. Thank you. And you're talking about bringing a lot of different elements of our current communities and the way that we structure energy together. And so I want to bring in utilities and turn to Greg now. So Greg, these networks have the potential to significantly shift the current utility model, and you've managed project deployment for one of the world's largest energy utility systems across multiple types of technologies, now including TENS. So what comes to mind for you when you hear about piloting and scaling TENS within your service region?
Yeah, thanks for the for having us here today. I mean, at Con Edison and behind me on the little slide there it says 200 years. I mean, that's how long Con Edison has been providing, whether from steam to electric to gas utilities to our area in one of the most dense parts of the country. We've been doing these things, right? The scary part of building neighborhood or district or citywide infrastructure projects, we utilities in general and us, specifically at Con Ed, something that we've been doing for a long time. And when you look at these networks and you break down the components themselves, they're not very different from what we do already, right? We install infrastructure in the street, we install pipes in the street. They could be HDPE, they could be steel. We connect services to homes and buildings. We put meters in homes. We bill our customers. We have that customer really connection to our community. And these networks, they're in our same customer bases. These are our customers that we're trying to kind of build networks for and decarbonize. they're challenging for sure, and the opportunity. And I didn't know John or Lisa, but they impacted the last 2.5 years of my life when they helped put that legislature together. I've been on this since a month after that law got passed. Really, it was a great opportunity we see for Con Ed to be able to design and build and really test these networks out, because although all the technology is not extremely new, this ability of kind of having the regulated utility able to build these and create new customer agreements and rates and really understand what makes sense for our customers so they can get their decarbonization goals, while also making sure that we have the same level of reliability and resiliency that we have today with our electric, gas, and steam utilities. That's a challenge, but it's exciting to us, and that's why we've taken a pretty big swing at it at Con Ed in designing some pretty innovative projects.
Great, thank you so much. And the law that you're referring to, just so folks know, is the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, or UTENJA. And so I'll get to that in just a moment. Before we do, though, John, I want to go deeper on the jobs impact of TENS. And I think it would be really helpful for our panel and our audience to understand what kinds of jobs we're referring to when we talk about building and deploying thermal energy networks. So can you expand a little bit on what skills we're talking about and how that overlaps with UA members today?
Sure, thank you. The jobs on the infrastructure itself, all the piping, it involves multiple crafts. You have plumbers and pipe fitters, you have operating engineers, you have drillers, you have insulators, you have the electricians that are involved. So there are so many different crafts on building out the infrastructure. And I think, as Reyna illustrated earlier, where you would no longer see cooling towers where the heat would get exhausted into the air, we're now utilizing and capturing that heat, bringing it back to the building. So the piping infrastructure is exactly in our wheelhouse. Lisa mentioned some have concerns about the training. It's exactly what union apprenticeship programs do, and journeyman training programs. We actually, once a year, the UA model is we send more than 2,000 full-time instructors to Michigan to learn newer technology. They then bring that back to their local training centers and educate more than 380,000 journeymen and apprentices in our industry. So training is the least of the problem. It's right in our wheelhouse. But now, once the infrastructure is in and you're inside the building, you have sheet metal workers, and again, insulators, HVAC technicians, stationary engineers. It's all the skills that are being used now that allows the transition for that very workforce.
That's super helpful. And Reyna, I know that you've looked at this research on TENS from a lot of different angles, but particularly the jobs angle. And I think for like you and me at CJI, it's really exciting to hear John talk about there are so many different trades and different skills that are going to be involved in this. And so I'm curious, what do you see as the broader impact of bringing this large scale labor movement, construction union movement into building decarbonization at a scale that we haven't really seen before?
What an amazing question, and I'm really excited to address it in front of three people who really brought me into the world of UTENS: Sonal, Lisa, and John. Pria, as you were saying, really one of the core tenets behind the work that we do here at CJI is supporting the ways that we can align the labor movement with the wider climate movement, and more specifically, the climate justice movement. As I'm sure many of you in the room know, and as many of my fellow panelists pointed out, finding a place for the labor movement, a place for high quality, highly paid, safe, and scaled jobs in building decarbonization has been an extreme challenge. But building decarbonization is also really one of the true cruxes of climate action. Buildings are our homes, our offices, our schools, our libraries. Sonal was really touching on how buildings impact our communities, and how they are heated and cooled really impacts the health of our bodies and the health of our wallets. So TENS are really this transformational technology where we're not only seeing a home for the labor movement in building decarbonization, but I mean, look at John here on the panel. We're seeing true leadership from the labor movement that is really serving as a catalyst for that cross-movement collaboration that we seek to really foster here at CJI. And we're seeing it in real, tangible policy action and projects. And again, as we emphasize time and again in our work and our mission, linking the labor movement and the climate movement is key to equitably tackling the climate crisis, because unions provide high wages and benefits and safety on the work site, and high quality, long lasting infrastructure and lifelong opportunities for learning that will be so, so crucial as we continue to innovate in the green economy. And I want to speak very briefly on my first experience learning about TENS, which was from the bill that we lovingly call UTENJA, or the very long title of Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act here in New York, really shepherded by the three people I highlighted before. I remember Lisa coming to me in my prior job and really pitching this, and I didn't get the vision. I didn't get it. And then it kept cropping up. It kept cropping up, and it felt like to me she brought us in. The bill was introduced. 5 days later, it's signed, or it's passed and signed, and we're also celebrating by July. Now, if you know anything about any state legislature in the country, that does not happen. And that is what makes me so excited about TENS, is that they're real and there is power behind them.
And if I could add, Pria, to what Reyna just mentioned as well, what's really important in UTENJA are the labor standards. It mandates prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship programs that guarantee family-sustaining wages, but it also ensures that there's pre-apprentice involvement. And 40% of the benefit would go to those communities most impacted by climate change. So for those communities that felt left behind, there's an entrance into the middle class by joining the building trades, and they have that entrance. That's what's really important, because I speak for many in the building trades that we believe that projects being built should reflect the communities in which they're being built. And that allows for this, for that expansion.
That's perfect. You all are setting me up perfectly, because I wanted to like dig into UTENJA. I think this is like a way for us to talk about what TENS deployment looks like in real life, and like really the pathway from policy into action. But I'm aware that there are probably folks on the webinar who are not familiar with what UTENJA is. So Lisa, I'm wondering if you could just talk us through what this bill is and what it does for New York State.
Yeah, I would be really happy to. So, so the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act of 2022, UTENJA, basically what it does is it requires the 7 investor-owned utilities, both the electric and gas utilities, right? We have 7 utilities in New York, to basically move forward and commence with up to 5 thermal energy network pilots, right? And the theory of the legislation was that, this could be up to 35 pilots. And then the goal of the legislation there were several goals, which was to really target and build some of these systems in, not my word, but it's our New York climate law word, called disadvantaged communities, where it requires 40% investments and benefits from climate dollars in communities. So to address what Tonal was talking about earlier, to really get pollution, to target these projects to get pollution levels down in communities. It also, one of the theories of the bill was that we were going to learn from these pilots. So these up to 35 pilots, and what the pilots then were going to inform is a regulatory process, right? That will make TENS, thermal energy networks, a permanent tool in the toolbox for utilities, right? Because right now they did not have that authority. And now they will, as we're like moving these projects out. It also, as John said, one of our other goals was to require labor standards so that these projects would be built with the union workforce and maintained and operated with the O&M, with the union workforce. And so what basically UTENJA did is then it set forth a process where the Public Service Commission, which is the entity that regulates the utilities, would open up a docket. It's called a docket or a proceeding. That proceeding then, asks for submission for the utilities for their pilot projects. So right now, the utilities have submitted, their pilot projects. Con Con Ed, Greg's, team has submitted 3 excellent projects. National Grid, which is the other utility, has submitted 3. Orange and Rockland has submitted 1. RG&E 1, NYSEG 1, Central Hudson 1, and National Fuel Gas 1. So the way that it set forth a process. So there's, I won't like bore you to every detail, but basically the process is really setting interim metrics and definitions and rules for the pilots. Then it set out a process to scope out the projects, then get engagement from customers, so customer engagement plans and engineering plans. Then we go to the operations side of it, post the engineering plans, and then we move to construction. And so right now we're very close in the phases where the utilities will be submitting their engineering plans, and we can hear more from Greg because they've got excellent projects. And those engineering plans will then be approved. And then once those are approved, then they will move to construction. So that's basically what the bill does and where we're at with the bill in New York. I want to say one more thing. I want to say that the power of the coalition that we did put together with the labor movement, with climate justice and economic justice organizations, environmental organizations, and organizations like mine that represent all kinds of stakeholders, including the building industry. I want to say that, the bill passed nearly unanimously in the New York State legislature. And I don't know, but I don't know every single bill. I don't track every bill nationally, but to my knowledge, I'm not sure that a climate bill in the nation has passed nearly unanimously and signed, as Reyna said, like immediately by the governor. So this is a really powerful, also political idea, especially if coalitions are built right, to really move progress on climate, especially buildings at scale. So
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned the coalition because I do think that's a really unique and interesting part of the passage of UTENJA. John, you uplifted what was important from a labor perspective. I'm wondering, Sonal or Reyna, if there's anything that you want to talk about as like having been part of that coalition.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Reyna said, UTENJA passed very quickly for a normal bill in New York, and that's true. And I think that is a testament to the power of, and frankly, it was felt very unprecedented of environmental justice organizations, climate and environmental advocacy organizations, labor, and there's actually a lot of other folks involved that supported the work, all coming together to advocate for something is pretty monumental and really does set a precedent for how to build power for good climate and jobs legislation and policies across the US. And we hope that that is becoming a good example. There's other states that are sort of starting to do this work in response as well. That bringing that together is very powerful because you are finding avenues to support environmental justice communities while also supporting the labor community. And by the way, those are not necessarily different communities. So that's a really important piece of this that, I think replicating that type of coalition for any work in the climate space is really important from here on out.
Great, thank you. So Greg, I want to bring you in now. So this bill passes and now you're on the hook for at least one pilot project, which is both exciting and I would imagine daunting. So just to reemphasize, under UTENJA, Con Edison is responsible for proposing and then executing at least one pilot project for a utility thermal energy network. Now, Con Edison has proposed 3 so far. And if I have this correct, one is under Rockefeller Center in New York City, one is in Lower Manhattan at an existing housing complex, and one is in Mount Vernon with mixed-use buildings. And each of these, like Lisa mentioned, the idea and the theory behind this is that we want to see how to approach TENS in different ways. So each of your pilot projects are approaching thermal energy networks in different creative ways. So could you tell us a little bit more about what each of these look like and also how they're going so far?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things yes, the bill got passed very quickly. Can't say it didn't catch everybody off guard, including ourselves. So we did have to, we did pivot quickly and really understand what this was and what the impact was. And we had a very early decision to make because there were some very early deadlines in that passage of how we wanted to go about this. So us at Con Edison, we had the opportunity to either, do the minimum to fulfill the statute, which is definitely a possibility. They say, hey, we have to make a project. Let's do what we just need to do. Or we can lean in heavy and say, what is this opportunity? Is this really something here that we can really lean into and get the most out of? So, we chose the latter after looking at it and realized that there's a couple different types of buildings in our service territory. So if you're not familiar with, where we are in New York City and the suburbs of New York City, our project in Mount Vernon is kind of like a suburban area, kind of dense suburban, detached, 1 to 4 family homes mixed around some regular community, buildings, which you would find, across the country, right, in areas like that. And then obviously we have very large residential buildings, low income residential buildings in New York City, which you'll find in many big cities, or even any cities really across the country. But pretty big ones for us here in New York. And then we have obviously very large commercial office buildings in New York City, right, in Midtown Manhattan. So we wanted to pick 3 projects that really picked up on all those different types of buildings so we can test them out and understand how these could be different. Because this was a new system and it is a new system, we have the ability to kind of design it the right way, right? We have to involve and make sure that we have systems that work for all of them. So, I'll start with our more less dense project in Mount Vernon. So Mount Vernon's a city, small city, just north of New York City, just north of the Bronx. And that project is truly a district geothermal project. So we're looking to connect about 75 different buildings over the course of about 4 or 5 block radius. And those buildings range from 1 to 4 family homes to, we have about 6 different churches. We have a medical office building, a firehouse, they're a big, really recreation center for the city there, and a lot of kind of mixed low-income housing. And what we're doing is we're tying them together by establishing, some very large borehole fields. So we're going to be look to place about 3 or 4 different borehole fields spread across the community, probably about 130 boreholes total is what we're estimating right now to connect these buildings. And we'll also be standing up a structure, an energy center, we call it, right? So that's really because these systems are closed water. You need to pump them around; they don't naturally flow. So you need to build the building. And we talk about all the trades, right? That John was talking about. We're going to build an entire building from scratch. We're going to do, we're doing ground testing right now, geotech testing in the next couple of days. What we've done there, we've actually installed our first borehole. So Con Ed has our first asset in the ground, our test borehole. We went down 850 feet about a month ago. Successfully installed a borehole, one of the deepest ones around, and we're excited. That'll be the first of many connected there once we get the approval to build the project. So, that's a great project. It's a lot of work on the outreach and education side. These are new systems to customers, to residents, to the city. As much of a difficulty in design and hurdle that is, the engagement with their community. John, you were out there with us in one of our town hall meetings. It really is, talking to the residents right where they are, and really getting everybody to understand what these are, and then also making sure we're building these in a way to protect our customers, both from a risk standpoint and from a cost standpoint. That's a big part of that project. So we're excited. That project, along with the other projects, is scheduled to have our designs completed by this summer, and then we'll be submitting them for that final approval by then. So that's the Mount Vernon project. And there's more aspects to that project, but that can go on forever. The other project we have is down in Lower Manhattan, in the Chelsea area of, if you've ever been to New York City, they've been to the Chelsea Market, kind of right near the Chelsea Market area. So there we have a lot of large commercial office buildings and a lot of data centers there, right? Google headquarters is a block from this project. But we have one other commercial office building which hosts data centers as well as other tech offices there, kind of mixed use, even a restaurant. And in the heart of the winter, they're running air conditioning constantly because they have to cool the inside of that building, and they're just exhausting that hot air to the roof, right? And that's kind of standard practice. If you had a thermal gun and a camera looking at New York City, you just see hot air coming off the roof in the winter. So what we're doing is we're capturing that that hot air that would normally go out to the atmosphere, and we're going to put it in our pipes, just like you would for a geothermal system, those horizontal pipes in the street. We're going to pipe it over to a New York City Housing Authority buildings. These are controlled housing buildings in New York City, where we're going to be converting their existing heating and cooling to this network. So we're going to be putting heat pumps in for heating and cooling for one of the buildings, and domestic hot water for the buildings, and standing up a small energy center there as well that can test out this network at that scale, and then also be scalable to grow as that build competencies we develop, as other buildings add on. So that's the second project. So it really is we'll be able to take advantage of both the waste heat from that commercial office building, but also their cooling capabilities. Because they have such amount of cooling, they could actually assist cooling our network during the summer season as well as we need it. So it's kind of like a two-way exchange between that office building and the residents of the housing authority. So that's a great project. And then the other project is really, innovative. It's important to us in New York City because we do have very large commercial office buildings. So the tree that was just recently lit, right, Rockefeller Center, that probably a lot of people see on the national stage, that's actually a campus sort of mixed on other city blocks, right? About 11 buildings are tied together, owned by one real estate company. And they do a very good job of interconnecting their buildings already and sharing heat. I mean, they have a whole thermal network connecting 11 buildings underground today. That being said, there's still an excess amount of heat in the coldest winter days there. And there's a tremendous amount of heat energy, just like it was at the data center, that can be harnessed. So what we're doing is we're doing exactly that. We're harnessing that heat from that campus and their central plant, and then putting it into our Con Edison piping, and then transferring it to 3 large commercial office buildings, and where they'll be converting their heating. And this is a heating only project for that one. The beauty of this project, when you get to the large commercial office buildings, is that there's seamless to the tenants of the building. Everything's done in the basement. So, somebody that's a tenant there, living there, working there, they don't know where it's coming from. They can't see it. You don't have to go in their apartment, because these buildings, they're more so complex that you're not adjusting, you're not putting in retrofit inside the actual living space. If we can find a way to make all 3 of these projects work, we think that they're scalable, and then we can really target where it makes the most sense to put these projects, whether it's in an electric network that needs to be offloaded, or whether there's sections of the gas mains that we think that we can retire. We want to be able to kind of put these in the right places, but we need to have all those tools, which is why we're designing these 3 unique projects. So hopefully by this summer, they all go in with the designs being fully completed, and we can hopefully have some projects to build starting either at the end of this year or the end of 25 or early 26.
Cool, thank you. It's super helpful to hear 3 different examples of 3 very different kinds of systems. And I know we're coming up on Q&A, and I have like about 1,000 more questions for you all, but I want to make sure we make time for our audience. And to the audience, thank you so much. We've been getting a lot of great questions from you all. Before we get to them, though, I wanted to sort of broaden this out a little bit and ask, these are 3 examples within Con Edison, within a pretty urban service region. Curious from Lisa and Sonal, I know you have your eye on this from a lot of, like, Lisa, you're looking at this across the state. Sonal, you're looking at this across the country. Are there other kinds of models for TENS, whether that's technology or ownership types, that you have your eye on and you want to, keep an eye on how it scales and how it does over time?
Okay. I'm like, either or. Yeah, so Building Power Resource Center, like I said, is hyper focused on working very closely with local governments and organizations to build building decarbonization projects across the country. And we're really focused on where there's sort of a good collaboration between local government and organizations already. And there's sort of a commitment to move forward with reducing our emissions. And one thing that we think about is how to empower working class communities through these projects. And so one thing that we have been looking into is what are the various different forms of energy networks that could not only sort of reduce fossil fuel use and reduce pollution and bring all these help with affordability and bring these powerful benefits, but how are we also investing in those communities and in those municipalities? So we have been looking at what it would look like to also build projects based on sort of the political landscape and the utility structures of the areas, with like electric cooperatives, for example, local municipalities owning thermal energy networks. There's been lots of sort of thinking around water utilities owning thermal energy networks. And so looking at all of these different ways in addition to a utility like Con Edison, there's a lot of different avenues. And if we are trying to really scale this work across the country and make massive inroads in addressing the climate crisis, we need all of these models, and different models will apply differently in different areas. And so that's something that we're looking to for 2025 is working with partners in different areas that are sort of looking to test these different models as well, in addition to the ones that are the ones that Greg described. So that's something, I don't know if there's folks in that are listening now that have something that they're working on. We'd actually be happy to work on that with you.
Just really quick so we can get to questions. So myself and the Building Decarbonization Coalition co-leads a coalition that we became a formal collaborative after the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, UTENJA, was passed, with John Murphy, one of our fearless leaders, with Sonal's former organization, We Act for Environmental Justice, Reyna's former coalition, Alliance for Greater New York, Agree, some grassroots environmental organizations, as well as national organizations, and in New York. And so we're really itching to get, our like really important priority is really getting these projects that are coming out of the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act into construction. It's really important that we start seeing that work happen now and making these projects move forward. And then the next piece of that is our top priority for us is getting these regulations in place. So remember how I said earlier that these pilots will then we're basically going to start a regulatory process that will make this a permanent tool in the toolbox for utilities and set the rules on thermal networks in New York for not just the utilities, but the other kinds of models that Sonal is talking about, which are, private models, big at scale, campus and university, municipality. So that's what this regulation is going to do. And it might sound like really boring, but it's really important, because when we get this done, we're going to have the safety, reliability, and scalability rules for like system ownership, costs, recovery, all these kinds of things. And it's really important because then that is like our green light go at scale. The second piece that we're really leaning into is the state has an executive order that's called Lead by Example. And remember in my earlier, I talked about what this means is that the state is supposed to be leading to decarbonize its own buildings and state facilities. And as I said in my example before, there's 180,000 institutional and commercial buildings to decarbonize. And the state has over 800 campuses that really need to get at scale decarbonized. So what the Upgrade Coalition is really focusing on right now is the really moving forward and where it makes sense and where these multi-building campuses where it makes sense to build thermal energy networks. We're trying to usher policy forward so that we're able to like build thermal energy networks on state campuses, prisons, hospitals, and other big multi-building campuses across the state. So that's the other model that we're really leaning in. And a couple years ago, we really started making progress in getting the state to like move forward on 15 projects on campuses, a mix of different kinds of campuses that the state owns. The State University of New York, so that's where we'll see the state colleges like move forward on projects. So we're very focused on like moving those projects forward as well so that we can start getting shovels in the ground and these projects to construction by 2026.
And it's important to note that with the expansion, with the support of UTENJA's support of state facilities, it allows local unions to bring in and recruit the next generation of clean energy workers. While there's unemployment, that's not possible. So that vision only becomes a reality with work certainty as it expands throughout the state.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing to it. This is exactly right, John. I mean, the whole idea of what we're trying to do is a lot of these big, like a SUNY campus or, you know, the State University of campuses, these are like big core institutions in a community, right? And then we've got all of these utility projects moving forward. And so the dream is that we want to be connecting all of these projects together, you know, to create like this new kind of energy system, homegrown in New York with union labor. So homegrown energy. So that's the dream. And we're just going to keep going year after year until we really make it a reality.
Perfect, thank you. And there is a question in the audience about where we go next, but I'll save that for sort of our wrap. One question I want to uplift in the Q&A, somebody asked, wondering about the role of utility worker unions in addition to building trades unions in advocating for TENS. Greg and also John, would you be able to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, I could take, and I kind of answered it in the comments there. When UTENJA was passed, both the outside labor union workforce that John and others continue to represent, as well as, Con Edison's local union workforce, as well as Con Edison as a company, we all got together and endorsed the passing of UTENJA. So, we are on board for it. It's a process, right? I mean, we're designing these kind of new systems. But we hope to be able to continue to, to build and maintain these systems as we go forward and get that training, created with our company and move forward.
And to expand on what Greg mentioned, the infrastructure itself and the build out has prevailing wage and apprentice and pre-apprentice requirements, which are building trades personnel. But once it's a built environment, it's turned over to the utility. Any modification, any expansion going forward are the utility workers. Any maintenance, it's in UTENJA as well, that the maintenance would be done from a labor organization that has an agreement with the utility itself. So it allows for that maintenance and modification and expansion afterward.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks, Greg, for catching that. I missed that. Thank you for responding directly. Here's a more technical question I want to uplift. So for the ground source heat pumps installed at a building, are these dual fuel heat pumps? The argument for those in these systems seems to be to provide supplemental heat a few times a year, but if the thermal loop is the same temperature all the time, what then is the actual need for a dual fuel system? This is way above my, I'm not sure who to throw this to, but who feels that they could pick that one up?
I mean, I could take it, and it's a legit question. So when designing these type of systems, the hardest part or the challenge in meeting load is that very top 10% coldest days, coldest peaks. That's the biggest challenge. And what happens is that if you just, let's say you're designing a geothermal system, we put in boreholes in, let's say your system needs 100 boreholes to get 80, 90% of the load. To cover those peaks, you may need an extra 50 boreholes. You may need to, so that it becomes a lot more costly. Now, there's different ways you could address it. So us at Con Ed, we're designing it in a way where we're trying to cover all of the loading by the borehole, so putting in those extra boreholes. But you could also add heat to two different places. So you can supplement the heating a couple different ways. So inside of a building, you can have, if you have a forced air system, you can have electrical resistive heating in your system to kind of get that backup or that peaking if you want to get it even hotter, or you can do it at the system level. And at the system level, again, it could be done fossil fuel free using electric boilers and or air source heat pumps that starts, or just cross the spectrum, right? If you look at existing networks throughout the world, it is common to have some sort of peaking, for different ways, right? Depending on the system. So, I think as technology advances, we're getting better and better and more efficient ground source heat pumps, and we're seeing them becoming more efficient and be able to do more. But right now in New York State, I think a lot of the utilities are really looking to be able to kind of cover it without that, definitely no dual fuel source at the home, but even at the network level, we're trying to make sure that, we can kind of cover it with our existing systems. But, you need that backup for emergencies, right? This is the difference between a utility taking it over and private taking it over. And I'll make this point here. We stand behind our services at Con Edison, right? We've been doing it for 200 years, and we regularly get ranked as the most reliable utility because our customers rely that we're going to give them the service we provide. And when we want to have that same level of reliability to this network. So in Manhattan, when we have these large buildings relying on these systems, especially in their kind of more infant stages where the networks are smaller and there's less thermal resources, we are providing that emergency backup to our systems using our Gen 1 from the beginning slide. The first generation district energy is our steam system, and that'll be there for emergencies to back up our system because we want to make sure that our customers are getting, we don't want them to be cold in the coldest day. And, emergencies could happen. Once the network is bigger and you have more pipes, more connections, more thermal resources, more customers, you can take some damage. But when we're connecting 2 or 3 buildings, if a contractor or somebody goes and hits that, by accident, hits a pipe, you want to be able to provide those customers with the heating or the cooling that they need, right, to sustain their well-being. So in the beginning, you may see some more things like that, but I think as they expand out or we go at scale, you'll probably have a less of a requirement for any type of backup like that.
Cool, thank you. I know we've got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to sort of turn the last audience question into a sort of wrap-up question. I'm going to cheat. So I want to uplift, Reyna, one of the things your research is clarifying and the presentation helps clarify is that this technology has been around for a really long time, but the moment that we're in right now is about really scaling up these networks in an efficient zero carbon way and in a way that is going to kind of scale equitably, that unions don't miss out on this opportunity, that environmental justice communities can reap the financial benefits, and that all of this happens in a way that meaningfully reduces emissions. So one person in the audience asked a question, what are some of the key challenges in the coming years as we move from pilots into larger scale adoptions? They asked in New York State. I'm going to also ask across the country. I mean, we're learning from each other across different states. So how do we do this in a way that scales up TENS, and like what's in our way? What do you all have your eyes on in the next couple years? And this is for everyone. And I'm going to give everybody about 30 seconds to do it because I know it's a big question, but I want to make sure folks can get off the webinar on time. Who wants to go first? Who's brave?
I'll go.
Okay,
I'll
perfect.
Right,
thank you.
I think for us, it's really important that that same momentum that was so strong to get things like the law passed in New York and to get these things kick off the ground, I think that's great. And I think as we need that type of momentum across all the states. And then also once you get them built and the laws are there to continue that momentum. These projects take a while to design them the right way. It's not a quick turnaround. So whatever momentum is built up to get laws passed or policy change, we ask, and now that we have the people that are doing it, the utilities, the municipalities who are building them, to help that wave continue to push the wind in our backs to help get these projects built, because until we build them, we don't want these strong efforts that were made by the pioneers to be lost through regulation or things of that nature later.
Perfect, thanks. Sonal, do you want to go next? You're in the top left of my screen.
Sure. In 30 seconds or less, I'll say 2 things. One is community organizing. We have to make sure to invest funding capacity and groups on the ground because, like Greg said, that outreach and resident engagement piece is actually one of the hardest parts of this work. And so that is really critical to continue to not forget that local grassroots organizations are so critical to this work of engaging residents and other like small businesses, things like that. And then secondly, the other thing that my organization is really focused on is the federal funding opportunity. We definitely have a lot of opportunity in 2025, how to take advantage of direct pay from the Inflation Reduction Act, how to take advantage of low and no interest financing from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. How do we make sure that all of the governments and municipalities that are going to be building these projects can really take advantage of the moment we're in now, and not all, and a lot of that money is sticking around no matter what the administration change brings us.
Great, thank you. Aaron, I'm going to pick on you. Do you want to go next?
I would echo what Sonal said. Basically, in 30 seconds, it's about education, and it's about demystifying, these systems. They're super powerful. They are the only way we're going to decarbonize and electrify at scale. Period. Stop. I think we need to stop. I think we need to really embrace it and just kind of walk into the market with confidence, but educate people and lean on John and the CGF as far as like jobs, energy savings, climate resiliency. And there's some really good questions in the Q&A about resiliency. I think we should also address those. But yeah, demystifying and just kind of getting people educated is going to be so critical. So good call on that, Sonal.
And I would say quickly, in a state-by-state basis, one of the reasons our collaboration worked when we passed UTENJA was to be able to build some trust with each other and not let perfect be the enemy of the good. And often that is the case where things come to a grinding halt because maybe it's not perfect, but overall it's great. And for those that have concerns with massive infrastructure, in a period of 20 years in the 50s and 60s, the United States installed 1.5 million miles of natural gas lines. We did it then, we can do it again.
Thank you,
Right.
John.
So I guess like my 30 seconds, I agree with everyone, and I'm going to say we need the high level political will and commitment to scale. Like this technology and neighborhood scale decarbonization needs to become like in our state playbooks as a core technology that's going to take us into the next tranche of decarbonization across our economy. And so we need the commitments to scale so that we can build the training, so we can move a pipeline, get that certainty to a pipeline of projects so that we can start training, we can getting our workforce ready, and we can start reducing that pollution in communities and hitting the climate targets that we have. But our biggest barrier is ensuring that it's not just offshore wind or large scale solar or large scale wind, but we need neighborhood scale decarbonization policies and strategies and TENS as a technology that is definitely crucial and critical that's going to get us there.
I guess I have the honor of going last. I think all my fellow panelists touched on so many pieces that are critical to scaling the scalable technology. And a couple of things that I kind of want to pick up on that I think about are the fact that this can happen at the local and the state level. As we enter a period of like deep uncertainty, TENS really seem to be a technology that we can jumpstart through existing and new mechanisms. I think of all the work that my fellow panelists have done to make UTENJA a reality, to make TENS technologies a reality. And I also think about what Lisa just said about this needs to become a key pillar of our playbooks. We also have key pillars that can be amended to expand and include and incentivize the wide-scale adoption of TENS, such as renewable portfolio standards. 10 states already have TENS or TENS components as part of their renewable portfolio standards. And those are such a critical way of decarbonizing our system and making that economically feasible. I think the other thing for me that I think about when I think about moving past the pilot phase is labor and community involvement. I became a little overwhelmed when doing this research that if we miss out, if the labor movement misses out, if the climate justice movement misses out on this, we really risk rehashing the same ecosystem of low wage, transient, no benefits jobs that have been created in the solar system that now we're trying to retroactively kind of regain the gains that the labor movement is really predicated on. But because this technology, we're just at the beginning of it exploding, bringing these communities together to really push for the provisions that often get either left out completely or left on the floor means that this technology will be resilient across political climates and across the climate overall.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. That is more than we have time for today. Thanks for sticking around for another couple minutes. I want to thank each of our panelists once again. So John Murphy, Lisa Diggs, Greg Camoulis, Sonal Jessel, and Reyna Cohen. I really appreciate all of you making time for this afternoon. Thank you also to Erin Miller for sharing your insights and expertise today on your presentation. On my end, a huge shout out to the CJI operations team and our TENS prep team. So special shout out to Gerald Cotianco, Katie Hayden, Melissa Shetler, Catherine Solis-Fonte, as well as Linda Nguyen and Dylan Smith for your research support for the last few months on TENS. And then finally, thank you everybody for joining us live today. You asked such great questions. We could only get to a handful of them, and I know it's just a really busy time of year, so we really appreciate you signing up for this panel and logging into the webinar. We hope that this discussion was insightful and inspired you to learn more about TENS. If you'd like to learn more, I mean, I had so many more questions for this panel on cost and other policies across the country that we didn't have a chance to get to, but please check out our research primer that will be released later this week. We do cover a lot of that in the primer, and CJI is really committed to advancing this work and getting a better understanding of thermal energy networks and making sure that they scale and they scale equitably. So until then, have a great rest of your afternoon, and we hope to see you again on a future Climate Jobs Institute webinar. Take care.